You started taking photos so you would remember more, but for a lot of people, the opposite is happening. The more life gets saved to camera rolls, clouds, and memory feeds, the less of it seems to stay anywhere inside you. Not because the files disappear, because once your past is always stored for you, your mind stops holding it the same way. That is what this is about. Camera rolls, cloud backups. On this day, prompts, auto-generated albums, small features that look harmless until you notice what they are training you to do. Trust the saved version more than the lived one. You can see it in ordinary moments. A birthday cake comes out, somebody starts singing, 3 people lift their phones before the candles are even lit. A kid crosses a graduation stage, and half the family watches through a screen in front of their own face. A couple finally gets to the coast after months of work, and by the second overlook, they are already checking whether they got enough of the trip. That does not look dangerous. It looks responsible. It looks loving. But that is the first mistake. The real change is not that people record more. It is that they have started trusting the recorded version more than the lived one. The photo is no longer proof of the moment. It is slowly becoming the moment that survives. And once a system becomes reliable enough to hold your past for you, your brain starts acting accordingly. The moment does not have to stay fully alive inside you anymore. It has been captured, backed up, sorted. So the archive starts doing more than storing your life. It starts teaching you what counts as your life. There is a small behavior a lot of people have at night now. They do not think of it as memory. They think of it as scrolling. They lie in bed, open the camera roll, drift back 6 months, maybe 2 years. A birthday, a hotel room, a dog asleep in a patch of light, a screenshot from a conversation that mattered too much at the time. They are not looking for information. They are looking for access, for proof that those versions of themselves were real. You have felt this before. That strange drop when you realize you remember the photo immediately, but the day around it is harder. The frame is clear, the feeling is not, and the system keeps reinforcing that split. Your phone returns memory in finished pieces. On this day, a smiling face from 3 years ago. A weekend trip you forgot was in October. An auto-made album with soft music and a title you did not choose. It looks gentle, helpful even. But it is doing something more invasive than people admit. It is returning your past already edited. Not fake, just narrowed. It gives you the parts that were captured cleanly, i.e., the parts with good light, the parts that looked like something worth keeping. And because those are the parts that come back, they slowly gain more emotional weight than the rest. That awkward silence in the car on the way home. Gone. The argument 10 minutes before the family photo. Gone. The smell of the place when you first walked in. Gone. The feeling of being 23 and unsure and slightly embarrassed in your own skin. Usually gone. What's said stays is what could be stored, and what can be stored is rarely the whole thing. That is where this stops being a story about convenience. It becomes a story about authority. Memory used to be messy, but it was yours. It blurred, it warped, it attached itself to smell, shame, private meaning, wrong details. It was unreliable, but it still belonged to the person who lived it. Now a lot of people meet their own past the way they meet old files. Search, scroll, tap, revisit. And after enough years of that, the uncaptured parts of life begin to lose status. Not because they mattered less, because they return less. That is worse than it first sounds. What gets revisited feels more central. What gets resurfaced feels more true. If the same vacation album appears 4 times, it can start occupying more emotional space than the ordinary week around it. Even if that week changed you more. If the same smiling photo of someone keeps coming back after they are gone, it can slowly replace the harder truth of what being with them actually felt like. A lot of people can still picture where everyone was standing at a birthday dinner from 5 years ago, all because they know the photo, they know the angle from the table, but ask them what it felt like to be there before the picture was taken, and the answer gets thin fast. That should bother you. Because now the archive is not just preserving memory, it is compressing it into visual evidence. Then people start living toward that compression. Watch what happens on trips now. There is the moment, and then almost immediately, there is the checking of the moment. Was it captured? Was it good? Do we need one more? The experience gets a second job. It has to survive as media. Even childhood gets shaped by this. Parents at school, plays, first steps, kindergarten mornings, soccer games, pool parties, tiny hands with sparklers on the 4th of July. Most of it is documented with real love. That part is true. But love is not the same thing as presence. Sometimes the camera becomes a substitute for the feeling that you were fully there, and later, that footage becomes the thing the child is shown as proof that the memory exists. This was your birthday. This was the trip. This was your dog. This was your room before college. This was you. Maybe. Partly. By now, the cost is no longer just weaker recollection. It is a flatter relationship with your own past. Because what gets lost first is not the event, it is the texture. The strange details that made it yours and not just visible. You can store an anniversary dinner. You cannot really store the exact feeling of noticing, for half a second, that the person across from you looked older and more familiar at the same time. You can store a hospital waiting room selfie. You cannot really store the dread in that hallway. You can store a photo of friends on a porch in summer. You cannot fully store the private relief of being understood without explaining yourself. The camera gets the surfaces. After enough years, people start mistaking surfaces for memory. This is where it becomes personal. Because if you keep returning only to what was captured, then you are not just forgetting random details. You are rehearsing a version of yourself that was easier to photograph, easier to sort, easier to bring back. The cheerful version, the presentable version, the legible version, not necessarily the truest one. Memory feeds do not usually send back the long, structureless seasons when you are quietly changing. They return the visible markers, the party, the airport, the promotion dinner, the baby shower, the beach, the holiday lights, the face you were making when things still looked simpler than they were. But some of the most important parts of a life do not happen in moments that photograph well. They happen in confusion, in repetition, in long recoveries, in quiet dread, in ordinary drives home, in the 10 minutes after a conversation ends when you realize it changed something, in the version of you that nobody would have thought to save. Those parts often do not come back unless you carry them yourself. People think the danger is losing their data. The deeper danger is becoming the kind of person whose inner memory gets weaker because the external version is always available. Then one day it turns strange. A person loses a phone and feels panic that goes way beyond money. Not because the device was expensive, because the self stored inside it feels more complete than the self still living in their head. Someone scrolls back to an old relationship and realizes most of what remains is visual. Restaurants, car selfies, a concert wristband, two faces in kitchen light. The images are there, the inner life is patchy, the actual feeling is already thinned out. That is not just forgetting, that is outsourcing. And once memory becomes something you outsource, identity starts changing with it. More of who you are lives in retrieval. Less of it lives in continuity. The past starts feeling less like a place you still carry, and more like a well-labeled folder you visit when prompted. At first that sounds efficient, then it starts sounding lonely, because a messy memory can still be intimate. It can still belong to you in a way no archive ever will. But a perfect record, resurfaced on schedule, can become oddly alien. Too finished, too visible, too sure of what it thinks mattered. And maybe that is the quietest loss here. Not that people forget, that they begin accepting a version of remembering that is thinner than living, but easier to manage, easier to share, easier to revisit, easier to trust. So they keep filming, keep backing up, keep trusting the prompt when it says, "This is what you were doing a year ago today." Keep scrolling when they want to feel close to a version of themselves they cannot reach directly anymore. And over time, the past stops arriving from inside. It has to be delivered. If your past only comes back in the form a system chose to preserve, how much of you has already been forgotten?